is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Strong jobs growth and unemployment at a 50-year low. The United States labour market beats expectations.
Our other headlines: the financial crisis engulfing India's Adani Group spills into Parliament with reports the government is investigating, and some of Wall Street's biggest names are at risk of contagion.
The European Union promises new sanctions to target Russian drones, but offers no time frame for Ukraine's EU membership.
And the return of the big spenders, why Italy's big brands are looking forward to Chinese shoppers hitting the high street.
The United States labour market remained extremely strong in January, according to the latest data.
Unemployment fell to a 50-year low of 3.4%, and over 500,000 new jobs were added. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, what's your take on the January jobs news?
Well, we've just heard from President Biden. He's on his way to the city of brotherly love, which is Philadelphia, which is about a half an hour's flying time from Washington, D.C. Before he left to begin his campaign for 2024, would you believe? He spoke at the White House and he said a number of things. For example, he said that inflation has now been coming down for 6 straight months. He said, I don't take the blame for it. No, it was already here when I got here. He said, this is the strongest job growth in history. The critics and the cynics are wrong. We've got the lowest unemployment in 50 years, and he said that black and Hispanic employment was at record levels, restoring self-worth and pride to communities, towns and cities and neighborhoods. But there is a problem with this story, and it's very difficult to explain. It is very subtle, because obviously this jobs growth that we've seen today, quite remarkable, quite extraordinary, quite unexpected, is very, very good if you are a person wanting work, or maybe you even want a second or potentially even a third job. So this figure is very good for you. Unfortunately, it's not very good for the central bankers here, who really want to see the economy slowing down, and that means companies not taking on so many people as they have done in January, in order that they can slow the economy, slow the companies down, and bring inflation down from its present more or less 40-year high of around 8%. Because what we got today really was just completely unexpected by almost everybody. 517,000 new jobs added here in just the month of January. Now, we'd been told to expect 189,000, so this is 3 times more than we were told to expect, and the unemployment rate is at a record low. It's at 3.4%. Now, it hasn't been that low since, I think it was May of 1969. That's 54 years ago. Leisure and hospitality came in with the most ads of 128,000, business and professional services 82,000. The question now is, why is it that we keep getting this wrong? You know, I've said this has happened to us on this program before, where we've been told to expect a number, and then it's far higher or far lower than the economists told us to expect. Now, at the moment, people don't really understand on Wall Street why this has happened, and they're balancing the good news for the economy, bad news for the Fed thing. And remember, Wall Street thinks that the Federal Reserve is very much in danger of overshooting with its interest rate hiking policy, and Wall Street has got it into its head that this economy is not going to go into recession this year, that it's going to kind of relocate, as it were, self-correct, that's the word I'm struggling for. And these numbers today play into that very much indeed. However, it does mean that the central bank is likely, I think, to go on raising interest rates either longer or far more than we thought they would from March onwards. And for that reason, the markets have been down today by about 1%. But it could have been more than that, I think, given the enormity of this job creation number in January. And at one point, an hour or so ago, the Dow actually turned into positive territory. So, as always with these things, we're in uncharted territory. And, things often are not what they seem to be.
John, taking all of that on board, Let's talk about big tech, and some big names in big tech haven't had such a rosy day.
Yes. No, I mean, if you remember yesterday, all these three big names I'm about to give you, the shares were all up by about 6% going into their earnings last night, Thursday evening here on Wall Street. And it didn't quite work out that way in the end. Apple, for example, which of course has such close links with China, revenue down 5.5% in the December quarter, which is when Christmas happens, of course. They're blaming things like the strong dollar, various production snafus, though Tim Cook, who runs the company, does say that he thinks there will be a resurgence in iPhone production and sales, and that will come from China, he says. However, also it's worth pointing out that Apple hasn't really laid anybody off yet. They haven't really hired anybody either, but they haven't had big layoffs, as unlike the other companies. Anyway, Apple shares were down, obviously, as a result of this news, but their margins are 43%. You know, everything they make and sell, they actually make about 43% on it. Pretty incredible. Amazon, unprofitable for the first time since 2014. AWS, their cloud business, only growing by 20%. It's used to growing a lot more than that. Their revenue was a big beat, but I'm afraid everything else was not good. And Alphabet, owners of YouTube and Google, a big mess on their Wall Street numbers. Wall Street been looking for a lot more than they got. Advertising and brands seeming to be pulling ads from Alphabet, which is not what we thought would happen. And finally, two other companies well worthy of a mention. One is Starbucks, which has very strong links with China. Starbucks builds a restaurant in China pretty much every 16 hours. It's remarkable, isn't it? There's real growth for Starbucks in China, and yet Starbucks sales were up 10% here at home, but down 29% in China in this quarter because of COVID. And finally, the Ford Motor Company losing $1 billion. Why? They couldn't sell 100,000 vehicles. That's pretty terrible.
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett in New York.
The financial crisis engulfing India's Adani Group has spread to the country's parliament. Members of India's opposition parties have called for an investigation into allegations of fraud and market manipulation by the group, with reports that India's Ministry of Corporate Affairs is reviewing its financial statements. Earlier this week, billionaire founder Gautam Adani abandoned a $2.5 billion share sale, and Adani Group companies are still losing value, with losses now totalling around $115 billion. It comes after US short seller Hindenburg Research accused the group of fraud, including stock manipulation. Gautam Adani has denied any wrongdoing.
The opposition, all the opposition parties, unitedly want a discussion on this extremely important issue, in as much as it affects the ordinary citizens of this country. And they believe that this is a matter of sufficient importance that the government should permit it. Now, as you know, the government is resisting. They don't want these issues to be discussed.
Well, let's talk now to Santosh Rao, who's head of research and partner at Manhattan Venture Partners. Good to have you back with us on the programme. So lots of global businesses involved with the Adani Group. Who are the most exposed?
Well, there's quite a bit of exposure to the foreign banks, like Goldman, JP Morgan, Citi. They all have investments in there. And then you have some sovereign funds as well. So I think there's considerable exposure outside, more institutional than retail. So, yeah, it's quite a bit. Then you have about 30% inside India as well, like the banks, local banks there. So it's spread across. And let's see where that plays out. But at this point, looks like there's no contagion effect yet, but the perception has definitely deteriorated at this point.
Well, let's explore that idea of contagion, the idea that this will spread outside the Adani Group into different companies and different sectors. How much concern is that causing, and how likely does it look?
It does not look good at all. I mean, Adani was this is a body blow across, major body blow to a person, to a businessman who was considered the gold standard of excellence, of someone who made it on his own, someone who made it across the board in every tentacles of the country. So I think this was a major blow to that, and to the extent that it gets affected more and more. And if these allegations prove to be correct, then I think that's a major blow. So we don't want that. The country's already reeling from a number of scandals before this, so they don't want another person just taking out all these loans and just defaulting on them. So there's a lot riding on this thing. He's going to defend it. At this point, the benefit of doubt is with him, but Hindenburg Research does good forensic accounting, so I'm sure there is something there, but is it systemic and is it very happening deliberately? We need to see that. So it's not proven yet. but definitely the narrative has shifted against him more and more.
And this is something that's even being talked about in India's parliament, isn't it? Has it affected investors' view of India, do you think?
Absolutely. I think he's considered close to the government, the ruling party. He was a major target. I think this is a bullseye as far as opposition is concerned. All the other industrialists, I'm sure, are concerned. But I think they don't want this to fail. I think the government doesn't want this to fail because and India is growing. They're attracting a lot of attention, a lot of foreign funding. So this will be a big blow to that perception, that flow of money. So nobody wants this to happen. But if it's wrong, it's wrong. And they need to be, everyone appears correct. Everyone says they are doing the right thing. And in this case, yes, they probably infringed on a few lines, like the corporate governance issues are an issue. To what extent was the money laundering issue exaggerated? Yes, he has these foreign holdings, companies registered in the tax havens. So is that illegal? Did he really launder money? All those things need to be proven. They don't pass the smell test, that's for sure. But is it illegal? Did he do something criminal? That needs to be proved, and I think a lot riding on this.
But whatever the case, this has, of course, caused huge reputational damage both for the Adani Group and for Gautam Adani himself. Is there any coming back from this?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, if it affects him, if people start buying, if he cannot refinance the debt, which is due starting in 2024, that's going to be a problem, and his rating is going to get affected. It's going to be difficult because infrastructure projects where he's involved, that requires heavy investments, requires going to the capital markets over and over again to raise money. So that window might close, and that'll be difficult to raise money. So for his whole business plan, his business model to work, he needs the capital markets on his side. So yes, it's going to be a big blow. I'm sure he's going to fight till the end. And let's see where it plays out. But nothing proven yet. The allegations are serious. Needs to be proven that they're not correct. Little time to go. He has some leg room till 2024. But that perception has to change. If not, it will be very tough to get out of it.
Santosh Rao, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today. That's Santosh Rao from Manhattan Venture Partners.
Prosecutors have launched criminal proceedings against the suspects behind a leak at Credit Suisse. Bank data was passed to a newspaper and covered more than 18,000 accounts, including those belonging to alleged fraudsters and human rights abusers. Prosecutors say the case violates Switzerland's banking security laws.
Chinese electric vehicle maker XPeng has stepped up its overseas expansion by launching 2 more models in Europe. The Guangzhou-based company said that they can now be ordered in Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands and Sweden.
Argentina is planning to issue a new 2,000 peso banknote to deal with its soaring inflation. Consumer prices jumped 95% in December, the fastest inflation rate since the early 1990s. The new banknote will be worth the equivalent of around $11 and is double the current largest bill. No date has been given for its introduction.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken postpones a planned trip to Beijing. We'll have the latest.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
This week on Razor, a water battery built inside the Swiss Alps that can store energy and generate it again when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
The same machine can rotate in two directions. In one direction it's pumping, in the other direction then it's turbining, generating electricity.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Ursula von der Leyen says there are no rigid timelines for Ukraine to join the EU.
The European Commission President is in Kyiv along with other senior leaders for the first summit between the EU and Ukraine since the Russian invasion nearly a year ago. Ukraine has been calling for continued military aid, but also wants Brussels to fast-track its membership to the EU. Von der Leyen says new EU sanctions will target components found in Russian drones. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Alex, we've now heard from Ursula von der Leyen and President Zelensky in Kyiv. What do they have to say?
Yeah, Jamie, there's a lot of unity expressed from the European leaders. You had Ursula von der Leyen, of course, the President of the EU Commission. She was also joined by Charles Michel, the President of the European Council. Josep Borrell, who's effectively the Foreign Affairs representative for the EU, was also there, as were the 15 commissioners of the European Commission usually found in that building behind me. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, that was the big question. There's a long wish list that the Ukrainians have asked for. We knew that tanks, for example, were a big issue. That seems to have been resolved with Germany and the US pledging to send tanks. More military aid being announced by the European Union in the last couple of days. More funding for the training of Ukrainian troops. But the big issue, the central issue, was Ukraine's membership of the European Union and how quickly that can happen. Let's have a listen to what President Zelensky had to say about how quickly he wants that to happen.
The goal is to start negotiations this year. And this is not just a purpose, but a major, overwhelming goal.
The major overwhelming goal there for President Zelensky is to start those negotiations within the year, this year, before the end of this year, and that is a very, very, very fast timeline indeed. If you compare it to anybody else, if you compare it to the Austrians, for example, from the moment they applied, it was 5 years before they saw membership, 10 years plus for other countries, 10 years for Croatia, for Poland. So the idea of starting accession negotiations in a year, and that's not really how the system works. So let's, obviously very shortly after, the journalists wanted to know from Ursula von der Leyen, from the EU leaders, what they thought the timeline would be, and here's what Ursula von der Leyen had to say about that.
There are no rigid timelines, but there are goals that you have to reach. Reforms, for example, to improve a situation in the candidate country, to then reach the accession negotiations and the accession itself.
Alex, alongside all of this, the EU faces a looming deadline to agree price caps on Russian oil products like diesel, something that's pretty much eluded them so far.
Yeah, refined oil products. We've already had a ban and a price cap on crude products from Russia. This is the next step, and that deadline is Sunday, the 5th. And that's when a ban on refined oil products takes action or comes into force across the European Union. The natural question is, why are they trying to cap the price of products that they've banned? Well, a lot of European companies are responsible for shipping, for insuring, and for handling Russian fossil fuel or Russian refined oil products like petrol, like diesel, like jet fuel. And so those companies would not be able to assist the Russians in selling that oil if the EU, if the oil is sent above the price cap set by the EU. Now, the EU suggested $100 per barrel. The Baltic states, Poland, which are far more hawkish on Russia, they want that price to be much lower. They want the financial pain for Russia to be much higher. Officials behind the scenes are saying they're confident, despite the fact that an agreement hasn't been reached yet. It could happen late this evening, and it could still happen tomorrow. Obviously, the deadline is on Sunday. The hope is, of course, to allow Russian oil to flow still and still be able to sell their products, but in such a way that they don't profit and that they will then struggle to finance their invasion of Ukraine. So no agreement yet, but some confident, positive noises behind the scenes from officials saying that price cap will come through before the deadline on Sunday.
Alex, thank you. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
Estonia's Prime Minister says additional military aid must be delivered to Ukraine as soon as possible to help counter a new Russian offensive. The leaders of Baltic countries have been discussing support for Ukraine and wider European security at a meeting in Tallinn. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. So, Stuart, what else has been said at this meeting?
Yeah, military, trade and sanctions were all things that all three prime ministers addressed. Within the Baltic nations, there's a lot of agreement on this, but they had messages for Western partners who they believed could do a lot more. So let's start with the military. They, first of all, that said those that are trying to reach the NATO commitment of 2%. Well, the Estonian prime minister said explicitly that she believed that was a minimum that was no longer good enough, that states needed to spend more than just that from their GDP. 2% of GDP, as is the NATO target. She also suggested that while it's great countries are looking through their warehouses and stockpiles of weapons to find deliveries for Ukraine, the defence industries in Europe need to step up and deliver and produce more in order to protect Ukraine. She suggested that there was more, the Estonian Prime Minister, that could be done in terms of weapons deliveries, not just more equipment, but getting it to Ukraine much faster. And she suggested that the next month was particularly important for that, saying that lives have been lost that could have been saved with faster action. When it comes to sanctions, a message to the European Union that it, as the Baltic country agrees, believe that Russian frozen assets should make their way to repairing Ukraine, should go to the Ukrainian government, and it's pushing very hard for that in order to allow extra funds to go to Ukraine. When it comes to trade, and also another message for the European Union, wanting to criminalise sanctions evasion. It's something that the Latvian Prime Minister said he was interested in doing because he felt, although he didn't cite any evidence during this press conference, that certain states, Turkey, Kazakhstan and Armenia, are all evading those in order to supply goods to Russia, which it's no longer able to get from Europe. But the main message was unity amongst the Baltic states and more support for Ukraine.
And Stuart, NATO has called on Russia to fulfil its obligations under a treaty to limit nuclear weapons.
Yeah, that's right. So NATO and the United States this week have said that Russia is effectively violating this New START treaty, which means that both countries are meant to be able to inspect, to an extent, each other's nuclear weapons arsenal. But that's not been happening, with Russia saying that the US cannot come to inspect its nuclear weapons because the United States is making it so difficult for Russian citizens to get to North America. They would have to go through Europe, for example, where the airspace is closed to Russian citizens without exceptions. Same for North America too. And so Russia says that's not fair. It also says that although it wants to continue the New START treaty, that it's an incredibly important treaty and it would like to renew it after 2026. The way things currently are mean that that is a difficult thing for Moscow to accept, because they say it cannot be renewed without taking the broader geopolitical situation into account. The US says this is a nuclear treaty. It should focus just on the nuclear weapons and not involve other security guarantees like Russia wanted at the end of 2021, for example. So that's where the dispute is. Both countries say it's important, but there's no sign about how this would potentially be renewed after 2026.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Germany has approved the export of its older Leopard 1 battle tanks to Ukraine. It comes after Berlin last week said it would allow modern Leopard 2 tanks to be delivered to Kyiv. But that decision has proved controversial in Germany. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
This is a historic move for Germany. Berlin's pacifist-based foreign policies following World War II are being redefined by the conflict in Ukraine, leading to a clear divide in opinions about how the country should handle it.
I'm a pacifist. It doesn't lead us further. It's just murder, murder. no peace can be established, and we are spending hundreds of billions.
It's high time. Putin should have been held accountable much earlier, so he learns that it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
Germany was in the Second World War, and we said never again to war. It's all been forgotten, and I think it's the time when we really need to be smarter.
The chair of international relations at the Munich School for Politics and Public Policy agrees that the historic symbolism is a significant consideration for many Germans.
Germany attacked the Soviet Union, which both Russia and Ukraine were, of course, part of at the time in World War II. And there's a strong sense that, on the one hand, there's a strong commitment to Ukraine to defend them and defend their independence, but there also is, I think, strong worry not to be seen as sort of attacking Russia once more and having German arms actually kill Russians.
But as the conflict continues, opinions are shifting.
As Russia has continued to pound the civilian infrastructure, to attack civilian populations of Ukraine, I think the commitment to help Ukraine defend itself has grown, including with whatever weapons are needed.
However, there is concern that this could be construed as German hostility towards Russia, forcing the government to take a good look at its own army.
With 14 German Leopard 2 tanks promised to Ukraine and set for delivery by the end of March, their manufacturer, Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann, is now under pressure from Berlin to rapidly build new tanks for Germany's own domestic protection.
When the conflict began, Berlin agreed to spend 100 billion euros on strengthening the country's military capabilities and defense, breaking with its post-Cold War tradition of underfunding the army. In addition to new Leopard tanks, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is said to be eyeing a multi-layered anti-missile shield that could cost as much as $18.5 billion. But there seems to be more unified public support for this.
The money that is now to be given to the Bundeswehr, the German army, is actually so late because for many years we have saved, and so it is now in a broken condition.
I'm definitely happy that they put more money in it.
This has been neglected for too long, and they're not well equipped in case of an emergency. So yes, I agree.
With tanks on their way to Ukraine, the EU is now discussing sending fighter jets, a move Berlin has so far rejected. But with the conflict far from over, opinions that have proven to be malleable in the past may change again. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich, Germany.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has postponed a planned trip to Beijing. That's after it was confirmed that a balloon flying over the United States came from China. Blinken said he didn't want the issue to dominate his meetings. The balloon was first spotted over the state of Montana, and the US military decided not to shoot it down over fears that falling debris could be dangerous. China says it's used for research and mainly meteorological purposes, and that it regrets its unintended entry into US airspace.
China has also said that it objects to further cooperation between the United States, Britain and Australia on nuclear submarines. This follows a report that the UK Prime Minister's visit to the United States in March may lead to an announcement on more nuclear submarine cooperation. China's foreign ministry says it's gravely concerned.
China says that cross-border travel between the Chinese mainland, Hong Kong and Macau will fully resume from the 6th of February. Existing arrivals quotas will be dropped and mandatory COVID testing will no longer be required. Our correspondent Richard Kimber reports.
From Monday, there will no longer be a daily quota in place for the number of visitors who are allowed to come into Hong Kong from the Chinese mainland, and there will no longer be testing requirements either for COVID-19. That will also extend to the territory of Macau. This is a huge boost for local businesses here in Hong Kong. Just to put this in perspective, before the pandemic began back in 2019, Hong Kong received some 56 million visitors across the course of the year. In 2021, at the height of the COVID pandemic here, that number slumped all the way down to 90,000, not even a fraction of the levels that Hong Kong is used to. Last year it picked up somewhat to around 600,000, but still way, way off the levels of visitors that Hong Kong is used to. And just to better understand the economic impact of this border reopening with the Chinese mainland, visitors from the Chinese mainland typically account for around 70% of those people who come into Hong Kong every year, which is why it's such a crucial part of the Hong Kong economy. And the economy here has really suffered during the past 3 years. Last year it shrank by 3.5%. That's the third time in 4 years that the economy has contracted. And talking to people across the tourism industry, local restaurants, local hotels over the past few weeks, everybody is incredibly optimistic now that with the border reopening with the Chinese mainland, with all border checkpoints now fully functioning, there will be some effort now to try and get the city back on its feet after what has been a really tough time for local businesses across all sectors.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, delays on the line, Britain's high-speed railway HS2, and why it's taking so long to arrive.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Strong jobs growth and unemployment at a 50-year low. The United States labour market beats expectations.
Our other headlines, the financial crisis engulfing India's Adani Group spills into Parliament with reports the government is investigating, and some of Wall Street's biggest names are at risk of contagion.
And the European Union promises new sanctions to target Russian drones, but offers no time frame for Ukraine's EU membership.
The UK's new high-speed rail project, HS2, is one of the largest in Europe, but has been beset by problems, including delays and running far over budget. Our correspondent, Louise Jabarkle, has been following the story. Louise.
Thanks, Jamie. Let's start with what was planned then. HS2 was originally meant to connect London with Birmingham, two major cities here in England. The second phase was to extend in a Y shape, going up to the north of England and cities like Leeds. But the Leeds leg in the northeast has since been scrapped over rising cost concerns. The original budget back in 20 2012 was a little over $40 billion US. 3 years later, and that official figure shot up to nearly $69 billion. By 2019, the official estimate rose to more than $100 billion. 1 year later, a government-ordered review of the costs estimated the bill could reach over $130 billion. But that might not be the end of it. Add to that soaring inflation that we've seen over the past year and the rising costs of building materials in recent years, and the figure looks set to go even higher. Well, the size and scale of HS2 means it's also having a significant social impact. With construction work ramping up, many communities are feeling disruption amid concerns it could be damaging the environment.
Whenever Brian Adams leaves home, this is what he sees. His property, like thousands of others in the UK, is near the roots of Europe's biggest infrastructure project, HS2. The controversial high-speed rail line is being built across parts of England, with plans to extend it to Scotland, affecting daily life for people like Brian.
In this area, we've had a lot of disruptions from traffic. You can now see a HS2 lorry going past me now. There's up to 550 of those a day.
In a walk around the London suburb of Ickenham, he shows us some of the impact the works are having. From here, 15 miles into the British capital is where HS2 will end, London's Euston Station.
This is already one of the busiest train stations in the country, and with its inner-city location, it's also in a densely populated area, meaning many nearby homes and businesses have been demolished in recent years to accommodate the line.
Here too, local campaigners have been protesting against the project for more than a decade.
They're just making everything worse. Traffic, pollution, green spaces, trees, homes, businesses, everything's destroyed.
HS2 declined our interview request, but said it's doing all it can to minimise disruption to local communities. From urban to suburban to the British countryside, most of HS2 will go through rural areas like this. The project says it will be net zero by 2035, making travel cleaner and greener. But some aren't convinced.
The ancient trees that have been here.
Victoria lives near Warwickshire in the English Midlands and is worried about the environmental impact.
You have a 300-year-old oak that is taken down in 3 minutes. And that's our ecosystem, and the hedgerows and the farmland. You know, we are going to need every single inch of farmland that we have in the years coming forward.
HS2 has already been hit by years of delays and tens of billions of dollars in additional costs. Supporters say it's necessary for the UK's economic future and will help it catch up with other European nations where high-speed rail is nothing new. But for those whose lives and livelihoods are being directly affected, the costs are all too clear.
Let's get more on this. Lord Jim O'Neill is an economist and former UK Treasury Minister and joins us now. Good to see you, Jim. Let's start with that last point in that piece then. In principle, is this a necessary investment given the ballooning costs that we've just been hearing about and the strain on public finances we're seeing in the UK at the moment?
I mean, I think the latter part of your question isn't directly relevant. If for long-term infrastructure projects, or it shouldn't be relevant, you know, worrying about what the budget consequences of it are today is really quite ridiculous, and that is part of the many issues that are dominating this. And maybe it's an issue about the complexity of democracies with elections every few years. But everything around the HS2 issue is also more broadly embellic of lots of challenges going on in the UK. But without overly complicating the start of my answer to you, I'm not the biggest fan of HS2, but given how far it's gone, if we were to no longer proceed with it, it would send a dreadful message about any long-term investment projects in the UK, and whatever the rights and wrongs about the ultimate benefits, the UK is woefully underinvested, both in the private and public sector, compared to other comparable nations. and almost definitely links crucially to our very weak productivity performance.
And why do you think HS2 in particular, why this project, why do you think it's been hit by so many delays and costs?
Well, I think at the core of it are three different issues. First of all, and I'm no rail engineer, but I think technologically and technically it's very ambitious for a country as old as ours in terms of historic infrastructure. They're trying to build whole new, or they'll have to build whole new lines to get it in and out of central London. That's part of the latest almost farcical discussion about some change. Secondly, even the original cost was questioned by many people who were thinking there could be better infrastructure projects for the broader benefit of more aspects of UK economic and productivity performance than just a train that gets people from London to various parts of the north and back even faster than it does now. And I happen to be somebody in that camp. And then thirdly, it's right in the middle of the extremely complicated political environment that the UK has had since Brexit. And the never-ending factions inside the Conservative Party. And for this latest story to leak in a major British newspaper on the day the Chancellor was supposed to be launching a whole new vision as to how you boost UK economic growth and investment was actually quite amusing, but also quite tragically sad. Because it's dominated all the headlines and it's just kind of ridiculous.
And the Chancellor, the Finance Minister, last week said that the UK wasn't very good at delivering infrastructure projects and that this was an opportunity to try and improve that. Why is that, do you think, when compared to other European countries, for example, who've raced ahead with high-speed rail?
I think I want to just caution slightly with some part of that question that, you know, we're not the only Western democracy that struggles on these things. The United States is notorious for problematical public infrastructure projects. Anybody that's ever gone in and out of JFK and tried to get into Manhattan would be more than aware of that. And there's many other countries too. And then secondly, and also an additional factor linked to the importance of the issue, some of those countries that have been really good at high-speed rail, Japan perhaps historically the single most important advanced nation, it's not solved their productivity challenges or growth challenges either. So the idea that this in itself is some kind of magical solution, I don't buy that. But you know, the real core issue is how do democracies, and particularly one that's now seemingly as fragile post-Brexit as the UK, manage to really have a cross-party and indeed, in this case, in the own political party consensus to push through immediately expensive projects that you won't see any benefit from way beyond the lifetime of a parliament where many of those MPs are going to be in charge. And it's a very, very difficult thing for democracies to do.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Lord O'Neill. That's Jim O'Neill, former UK Treasury Minister. Back to you guys.
Naweed, thank you very much. Well, that's the railways. What about cars? The future of motoring is electric to reduce carbon emissions, and Chinese know-how is a part of that shift. In Mexico, a large investment has brought in technology from across the Pacific. CGTN's correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports.
Mexico City's trolleybus. It's an electric trolleybus public transport system that carries 3.5 million passengers a month. With 10 different lines running across this megacity, a single journey costs the equivalent of about 21 cents.
En el trolebús va uno muy tranquilo.
Riding the trolleybus is comfortable and easy. Other forms of transport here get very packed, and the wait times are long.
Mexico City's trolleybus infrastructure recently got an upgrade. Since 2019, Mexico City has bought 425 new trolley buses at a total cost of just over $200 million to modernise its public transport system. All of these emission-free vehicles have come from one Chinese company, Yutong. Martin Lopez is the director of Mexico City's electric public transport services.
The performance of these vehicles has been very good, and whenever they have presented failures, the provider has responded and fixed them immediately. And the passengers are happy because the vehicles are very comfortable and, above all, safe.
Safety is a growing concern for the capital's public transport. Several crashes in recent years involving the city's antiquated subway system have provoked rider fears, including one just last month that left an 18-year-old student dead. Upgrading the trolleybus system has made it one of the capital's most reliable ways to get around. That's leaving an impression that the president of the Mexico-China Chamber of Commerce says can only be good for the future of cross-Pacific business.
Today, the fact that Chinese electric vehicles are seen as quality products will allow more of such transport to come from China. These are initiatives that will attract the largest Chinese companies to Mexico.
As Mexico's public builds faith in Chinese electric vehicles, Yutong may be opening a huge market of opportunity for others to follow into North America. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
Poland and a coalition of Baltic states are urging countries to back a ban on Russian and Belarusian athletes competing in the Paris Olympics next year. They say athletes from the two countries should not even be allowed to compete under a neutral flag. The United States, Britain and Canada are expected to support the call. Last week, the International Olympic Committee said athletes could be allowed to compete in Paris after taking part in Asian qualifying events, although the IOC later said it would stand by sanctions against Moscow and Minsk.
Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has arrived in Berlin for her first meeting with Germany's Olaf Scholz. Talks are expected to centre on the EU's borders and its handling of migrants, as well as EU rules on state aid. The two are at odds over the European Commission's Green Deal industrial plan, which will see a loosening of state aid rules in response to US investment in green industries.
Serbia's president has warned that it risks becoming a European pariah state if it rejects a plan to normalise relations with Kosovo. Serbia's government does not recognise the sovereignty of its former province, which declared independence in 2008. Kosovo is willing to create an association of Serb-majority municipalities, a plan supported by both the United States and the EU. But Serbian nationalists consider any move towards recognising Kosovan independence unacceptable.
The pandemic caused chaos with global supply chains, but last year things were looking up as trade rose 10% to $25 trillion. This week on the agenda, trade in 2023. Juliet Mann talks to the WTO's Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is cautiously optimistic.
I can't say we're out of the pandemic completely, but of course we are glad that things seem to be getting better. And I think with that, the issues with supply chains have been improving. You know, ports that were shut have opened. Shanghai was shut for a period of time, but that opened some time back. And, you know, the logistics of supply chains, I think, has undergone quite a lot of work. Digitization has really helped. So it's not that we're out of the woods, but I think we are in a better place.
And you can see more of that interview in the agenda with Juliet Mann this weekend here on CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a new look after the pandemic lockdowns, why the makeup industry is facing the future with optimism.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The return of the big spenders, that's what the European fashion industry is hoping for. Before the pandemic, Chinese tourists were the highest spenders in the luxury sector worldwide.
In 2019, more than 5.3 million of them visited Italy. Our correspondent Alex Fraser reports from Milan.
Europe's luxury boutiques are full of customers at the start of 2023. After poor sales during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the sector has rebounded and is now growing again. With China relaxing travel restrictions in time for the Spring Festival, Europe is awaiting Chinese visitors. Analysts say that Americans and Europeans adopted a you-only-live-once attitude in 2022 to spending on luxury goods since COVID control measures were relaxed. The return of Chinese consumers could contribute further to a rebound in growth.
The Chinese were to embrace the same you only live once attitude, the impact could be important because the Chinese were the #1 nationality before the pandemic and they could quickly return to the top spot.
In 2019, Chinese consumers accounted for almost 1/3 of luxury goods purchases made worldwide, spending more than $100 billion, with 2/3 of that expenditure outside of China. Tax-free shopping for tourists overseas is cheaper than buying the same items at home. And for visitors, it may have felt more authentic and desirable to buy from their favourite brands in their European flagship stores in London, Paris, and here in Milan's Via Monte Napoleone. It's a street known worldwide for fashion's most exclusive brands. During the last 3 years, visitors from China have been noticeably absent.
Tutti i brand italiani.
All of the Italian brands, big and small, are awaiting the return of Chinese buyers to Italy. We welcome them back with open arms.
Year of the Rabbit-inspired collections are in the shop windows as brands look to appeal to returning Chinese consumers. It's not just the giant brands that are welcoming back Chinese visitors. Kikalualdi, founded in Milan in 2010, specialises in cashmere knits. Designed and made in Italy, and popular with Asian consumers, it's a regular staple on the catwalks of New York and Milan.
It's very important for the fashion industry to have Chinese consumers and buyers back, not only for a matter of economy, of course, and for the economical opportunity, but also for a kind of exchange, cultural exchange.
Later on this month, Milan's Fashion Week takes place. Chinese buyers and designers can return for the first time in 3 years, when it begins on February 21st. Alex Fraser, CGTN, Milan.
China has gone back to work after the Spring Festival holiday, and there's growing optimism that after years of COVID and lockdowns, 2023 will see a retail rebound. CGTN's correspondent Wu Lei reports.
This factory is mainly used for producing nourishing cushion, setting powder and other beauty products. Qian Taoyuan and his colleagues are working shifts around the clock to package these cosmetics, as their production capacity has fully resumed.
Now, our order volume has increased by 50% compared with that of the same period last year. We expect our production to reach more than 50 million pieces per month, which is our highest capacity in history.
In order to catch up with the production orders, they are hiring, aiming to have 30% more employees by the end of February. As spending on global consumer goods is expected to rebound, more Chinese exporters are planning to adjust their marketing strategies to further expand their overseas markets. Built in 2017, Floresys aims to become an innovative makeup company. With the increasing investment in research and development, the company has created modern beauty products combined with traditional Chinese culture and aesthetics. Those products have been exported to over 100 countries and regions.
There's a story behind it, and then the reason why we build these products are not only just for selling a product, but also trying to tell a beautiful love story in Chinese culture. So we will localize our content much better, we'll improve our marketing messaging better to communicate in their way that they can understand.
Since the start of 2023, domestic and cross-border travel have soared. Experts say consumption is expected to be one of the major drivers for China's economic growth this year.
And of course, from global perspective, China's reopening is also positive news, particularly when we're generally talking about the global recession risk and the G3 economies actually were facing economic slowdown pressure. So the recovery and the acceleration in China's economic growth also provide a very meaningful offsetting for the global economic outlook for this year.
According to the latest report from IMF, China will account for 30% of total global growth this year. China's reopening is expected to power the global economic recovery in different channels. Wu Lei, CGTN, Shanghai.
Europe.cgtn.com has all of the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take of some of them.
China's railway system transported more than 102 million passengers over 10 days of the Spring Festival. That's an increase of almost 10% on 2022. China plans to build more than 3,000 kilometres of railway in 2023, including 2,500 kilometres of high-speed lines. The AG-600 large amphibious aircraft has entered the airworthiness first test phase. Codenamed Kunlong, or Water Dragon in Chinese, China's space station taikonauts are exercising their muscles in microgravity by rowing, squatting and pulling, using a treadmill and even a customised spacebar. More than 100 blossom-headed parakeets have been filmed in Ruili, Yunnan province. People across China are preparing to celebrate the Lantern Festival on February the 5th, with activities including dragon dances and fireworks.
And finally, a dog in Portugal has been named the oldest ever by the Guinness Book of Records. Bobby was abandoned as a puppy, but was taken in by a family who registered him with a vet in 1992. He's now 30 years and over 250 days old. With dog years said to equate to 7 people years, that makes him well over 200 years old in human terms. His owners say that Bobby's peaceful and relaxed lifestyle may have kept him healthy.
The headlines again. Strong jobs growth and unemployment at a 50-year low. The United States labour market beats expectations.
Financial crisis engulfing India's Adani Group spills into Parliament with reports the government is investigating. And some of Wall Street's biggest names are at risk of contagion.
And the European Union promises new sanctions to target Russian drones, but offers no time frame for Ukraine's EU membership.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.